Hey everyone, it's Brian. Streaming in place here from my house once again. It's been a while since I've been on the stream, so for anybody who's new, I'm a technical audio designer at Ubisoft San Francisco, and I like to build stuff. So Doug asked me a couple of days ago, he said, "Hey, do you have any new gear that you'd like to show our audience?" And I said, "Not only do I have new to you gear, but I have new to me gear." So I thought about a couple of the things that I've made recently and what I could show people. And the first thing was this. This is a distortion pedal. It looks like a Klon clone, but it's not a Klon clone. But the last time I was on the stream, we talked a bunch about pedals that I'd made recently, so I thought it might be more interesting to talk about something that wasn't a pedal this time. So the other thing that I have is this. This is a guitar that I finished building just about a month ago. So this is a pretty straightforward build, kind of loosely based on a heavily offset double cut junior. Set neck, 2 humbuckers, 1 volume, just a toggle switch, no tone control, because we all know you're just going to turn the tone up to 10 and leave it anyway. It's a 25-inch scale, a little longer than a Gibson, a little shorter than a Fender. That's what PRS uses. It's also what Martin used on acoustic guitars. It's kind of a nice in-between. It's got a set neck with a long tenon, similar to what you would see on a Les Paul Jr. or a PRS. The top of the guitar is Afromosia, which is a wood that's tonally similar to maple, but is a little darker in color and has a nice grain pattern to it. The back of the guitar, which we'll talk a little more about in a minute, is actually probably Japanese maple. As you can imagine, a solid maple guitar is fairly heavy, but it sounds good. The neck is a 3-piece laminate. The outer pieces are Babinga. The center stripe is maple. It has a string-through body hipshot hardtail bridge, hipshot locking tuners, a Pau Ferro fingerboard, and a bone nut. In the past, I've usually used tusk nuts, but I wanted to do something a little more traditional for this guitar. And the bone polishes up really nicely and it's easy to work with. The color on this guitar is all aniline dye, and then the finish on it is actually shellac. Now, why shellac? You don't usually see shellac on electric guitars. It's something you're more likely to see in high-end classical guitars or French polish on really expensive furniture. So for me, a big part of why I've started using shellac is because it's non-toxic. I used to spray a lot of lacquer, but I don't want to have to deal with the fumes or building a paint booth when shellac is fairly benign, though I would still wear a respirator. So shellac is nice because it's a really thin and flexible finish. It's the reason it gets used on a lot of classical guitars, because those luthiers tend to think that it's the finish that gives the best tone because it's so thin. It's not the easiest thing to work with. There's definitely a learning curve, but the results are really nice. And it's easy to touch up if ever the guitar has an accident at some point in its life. It's got a nice feel on the back of the neck. It's not sticky like a lot of the thick poly finishes are. So, the electronics. The 2 humbuckers in this guitar are ones that I built. I've been building all my own pickups for the better part of a decade now. And to be honest, these are ones that I just had sitting in a box, so they went in this guitar. But they work well with the bright nature of this build and its woods. They're both fairly hot PAF style pickups, wound with plain enamel wire and using Alnico magnets. One thing that's absent from this guitar, and this is kind of a dig at Dan because he loves straps so much, is there's no strap buttons. So there's no strap on the guitar. So I guess for me, the most interesting thing about this guitar is kind of the story of how it came to be. As I said, the body of this guitar is probably Japanese maple, and you're probably wondering, how is it probably Japanese maple? Why don't you know what it is? So the wood that this body was made out of kind of has a story, and that's what makes this guitar important to me. When my grandfather passed away, and this was years and years ago now, I went to help clean out his stuff. And tucked away in the corner of the garage was this big plank of wood, like dark chocolate brown, just stamped to Japan on it. It looked like something that was probably used on a cargo ship to shore up the containers. So I dragged it home with me and I said, I'm going to build a guitar out of that. Now, I didn't necessarily have all the skills or knowledge to do it, but I had the desire. And I dragged that piece of wood through 5 different houses with me, sitting in the corner of one garage or the corner of a shed, before I finally got around to starting to build the guitar. I actually dragged it to a 6th house once I'd started it but hadn't finished it yet. So for me, this build is this culmination of 15 years of saying, I'm going to make a guitar out of that. I'm going to make a guitar out of that. Someday, I'm going to make a guitar out of that. And there were many projects in between, but hey, I made a guitar out of it, and it turned out pretty good. So if you like hearing about the various projects that I have, you can check out my social medias, which I think Doug and Brian will post somewhere, maybe here, maybe here, maybe in the chat. And you can also bother them and tell them that you would like to see more of this, because there's always something cooking on the bench. There's a few more guitar builds. There's always some pedals in the works. We can talk about distortions another time soon, maybe. But yeah, thanks to Doug for inviting me on the show, and have a great week, everyone. Thanks.